Awesome. Okie dokie. All right. Well, I think Erica's already started recording, so we can go ahead and get started. We have a amazing panel today, so I want to give as much time as possible. So I will get through my preliminaries. But welcome everyone to our Who We Are Celebrating Our Pride. My name is Ashley Hines. I am the Director of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion in the Midwest, and I am thrilled to greet you for today's event. This is the first of actually the second Pride event, but the first time that we're doing a Pride panel for Who We Are in our series. So it's really exciting. This is our 14th session of the series, and it'll actually be our last one for a few months as we take a summer break. But our 13 sessions leading up to today have garnered over 2,300 teammate engagements, with many others watching the recordings. And so we know this series has meant something to our advocate health community, and I know today will be no different. It is just one way that we provide a space for us to come together and connect as teammates and to celebrate who we are, our different cultural and ethnic, and all the different ways that we show up here at work. So I'm going to stop because I really want to turn it over and give as much time as possible for today's conversation. So I am thrilled to introduce you to Dr. Alexandria Holliday, and I'm going to allow her to introduce herself, and then we'll share a video and go to our panel. So Dr. Holliday.
Good morning, almost afternoon. I am Dr. Alexandria Holliday. My pronouns are she, her. I am from Chicago, Illinois, and I have the luxury of practicing in Chicago, Illinois. I am an adolescent medicine pediatrician, and so I take care of teenagers and young adults. So as you can imagine, there's never a dull moment. Part of my clinical expertise and is gender affirming care or gender health. And so being part of this discussion is very near and dear to my heart. I'm kind of hoarse because I'm fresh off of Pride, hence my progressive Pride nails. So that was a moment I can't describe. So, but I'm excited again to be part of this panel and to allow you all to hear the stories of our colleagues. So thanks again for having me.
All right, we are going to show a video to kick us off. Please feel free to adjust the sound on your end as well.
In the early morning hours of June 28, 1969, a riot broke out in front of the Stonewall Inn in New York City. The violent protest became known as the Stonewall Riots. The Stonewall Riots were a watershed moment in the gay rights movement, sparking activism and awareness across the United States. We'll look at the roots of the riots, the events, and their lasting impact. In the 1950s and 60s, homosexuality was still considered sodomy and illegal.
I'm sorry, I was asked to increase the sound, so I'm going to do that.
In 49 states. The punishments varied greatly by state, ranging from heavy fines to imprisonment. In society, members of the gay community were often subject to violence, harassment, and discrimination. In New York City, gay bars were havens for people with diverse sexual orientations and gender identities, places where they could avoid harassment and violence. The Stonewall Inn served as a popular refuge. The Stonewall Inn was owned by the mafia. The mafia bribed the police to look the other way. In turn, the mafia made money overcharging patrons for drinks. Even so, the patrons were not fully safe from homophobia and discrimination. The mafia would extort wealthy patrons, threatening to out them to their employers and families. Despite the mafia's bribes, the police still regularly raided the Stonewall Inn and other gay bars, charging them with solicitation of homosexual relations. Trans and other gender nonconforming people were also targeted, subjected to violence, and arrested if they weren't wearing what the police deemed gender-appropriate clothing. This oppression and mistreatment came to a head in the early morning hours of June 28, 1969. 9 police officers entered the Stonewall Inn in a raid. The patrons were fed up. As the police roughly tried to arrest bartenders and customers, many resisted. Outside the bar, people in the hundreds began rioting. They threw bottles at the police and pushed through the barricades. The police officers retreated from the crowd and locked themselves inside the Stonewall Inn. Rioters responded by setting the bar on fire. Police reinforcement arrived, and the original officers managed to get out of the burning bar. Meanwhile, the angry mob had grown into thousands. Eventually, the police were able to get the crowd to disperse, but it didn't last long. The riots continued until July 1st. While some criticized the violent and destructive riots, others pointed to the brutality and unjust treatment of the gay community. This large-scale defiance made a massive impact on society. The Stonewall riots were the beginning of the modern gay liberation movement, which also brought attention to others marginalized for their sexual or gender orientation. The riots sparked the formation of the Gay Liberation Front, the first group to publicly advocate for equal gay rights. On the one-year anniversary of the riots, they also organized the first Gay Pride Parade. Today, Pride events are still held on the anniversary of the Stonewall riots in cities around the country and even the world. In 2016, President Obama made the Stonewall Inn and the area outside where the riots broke out a national monument. This became the first national monument celebrating gay history. The Stonewall riots may have been violent, but they marked a pivotal moment in history. No longer would people quietly endure the stigma associated with their sexual and gender orientations. Through the Stonewall riots, the gay rights movement gained mainstream visibility and a momentum that continues to this day.
Dr. Holliday, I'll turn it back over to you to have our panelists introduce themselves. Up, you're on mute, Dr. Holliday.
Very powerful video. Of course, still so much work to do, but as Ashley said, I have the luxury of introducing our panelists. So we can start with Dr. Owen Clay.
Hi, I'm Owen Clay. I'm a pediatric rheumatologist at Wake Forest in Winston-Salem, which is part of the Atrium Health and now Advocate umbrella. I use pronouns he, him, or they, them, kind of depending on context. I'm a pediatric rheumatologist, which means I take care of children with rheumatologic diseases like lupus or arthritis. I'm mostly a clinician. I'm also involved in teaching, have a background in research. And I think we were supposed to share a quote. And my favorite quote is, "This must be Thursdays. I never got the hang of Thursdays." Even though today's not Thursday, feels like it.
Awesome. Thank you. Next, we have Maci.
Hello, good morning. My name is Maci Eiber-Coons. Mostly I just go to Maci Eiber though in the workplace to make it a lot easier. I am a clinical research coordinator at Advocate Illinois Masonic. It's in Chicago, Illinois. So very happy to be there. Been with Advocate for about 13 years now, I think just this year, actually just this month. So been here for quite a while. Mostly I help coordinate the cardiovascular and neurosciences clinical trials that come through our site and help kind of advance research and kind of push medicine forward in that way. I guess favorite quote, I don't really have one, but the one that's kind of been on my mind the last few days, and because I heard it in a song, it comes from James Baldwin in a letter to Angela Davis, but says, if they take you in the morning, they will be coming for us that night. And it's been very kind of like on my mind the last few months, especially over the last year. So that's that.
Thank you. Angela.
Hi, I'm Angela Martin. I am a licensed clinical social worker in Kenosha, Wisconsin. I'm a behavioral integration therapist, so we are doing behavioral health integrated into primary care. And yesterday was my 9-month anniversary at Advocate Aurora, so I'm what you would call a newbie in many ways here. I worked in Kenosha for many, many years, and the job that I do it's short-term behavioral health integrated into primary care. So we get to see people for up to 6 sessions. So it's really Advocate Aurora is doing a great job of increasing access for behavioral health, which I'm really proud to be a part of that. And it's going really well. So my quote, I thought a lot about the request to come up with a saying or a quote. And there's a singer-songwriter named Farron, who's a Canadian butch lesbian who I adore. If you haven't heard of Farron, you should look her up and listen to her music. But one of the lines that I really love from one of her songs is, the song is called Ain't Life a Brook, and it's life don't clickety-clack down a straight line track. It comes together and it comes apart. So I feel like that quote has a lot of resonation for me right now and in general. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing. Dr. Schafer, you are next.
Hi, I'm Katherine Schafer. I'm an infectious disease physician here in Winston-Salem. I do a lot with the medical school and medical education, but one of the things I'm proudest of is helping to start our institution's participation in Pride and our LGBTQ plus allies affinity group or resource group, I know they're also known as. And so the quote that resonates with me is one from Ruth Bader Ginsburg that says, "Real change, enduring change happens one step at a time." And we just had our Pride Parade this past weekend, and when we first started participating in Pride, there were 5 or 6 of us who had chipped in to pay for the table. We were on a side street. We used a telephone pole to put up our posters, and now Atrium Health Wake Forest Baptist is one of the sponsors of Pride, and we have a huge presence in the parade. And so one step, enduring change. So honored to be here as an ally.
Thank you so much. And last but not least, Dallas.
Hello, good morning, everyone. So my name is Dallas Vasquez. I go by he, him pronouns. I'm one of the HR consultants for the Midwest corporate functions. So my role is best described as really a hodgepodge of all different things HR. So I am based here in the Wisconsin area, so greater Milwaukee area. I am going to be celebrating my 2-year anniversary tomorrow here with Advocate. So it has been a fun 2 years. It's gone by fast, and I've been so fortunate to meet so many amazing people and work with so many amazing leaders and teammates. So I'm super excited to be coming up on that. Trying to think my favorite quote. So I'm a huge RuPaul's Drag Race fan, and I love RuPaul. And I would want to say my favorite quote is, "If you can't love yourself, how are you going to love somebody else?" I think it's so important.
Love it, love it, love it. I find myself telling that to my teenagers all the time. So that's awesome. Thank you. All right. So let's get this party started. I should say I forgot at the beginning. So I do work at Advocate Children's in Oak Lawn, and I also did my pediatric resident training at Advocate Lutheran. So I'm an advocate baby. So I'm so proud to continue to be part of the institution. So some of you already shared a little bit, but if you could go into a little bit more detail about how you identify as a member or ally of the LGBTQ plus community, and if applicable, how long you've been out in the workplace and how did you come out in the workplace? Any order. Don't make me pick. I see you reaching, Maci. You go for it.
So I identify as a trans woman, or queer trans woman, I guess, in the LGBTQ plus spectrum. I don't really know what that means, besides the fact that, I've always felt like I've been a woman, and it's just, been part of my identity even since when I was younger. I had a lot of times had to cover it up and hide who I was. I formally came out in 2018. I've tried many times when I was younger, even just to friends and, family members, and never really kind of took off until about 2018 when I had my daughter, and realized that that's where I wanted to go. At the time, I was actually a nurse in the emergency room on the south side at Advocate Christ Hospital. And it was a little bit of a stumbling out. I wouldn't say coming out. I kind of came out of the closet very haphazardly. No clear plan at how to transition at work. No clear plan of how to, start telling people, especially my coworkers. I had the personal side figured out. It was everybody else, how to start coming out to patients, when I would interact with them. Very strange gender presentation as I was figuring it out myself, as well. Thankfully, I had some very supportive coworkers and colleagues who were just extremely positive the moment I came out. They welcomed me. The minute I came out, they accepted me for who I was. And while there was a little bit of backlash, the South Side of Chicago has, conflicting views, very progressive and very conservative that intermix together. For the most part, it was those coworkers that really kept pushing me through, that kept me from backpedaling and trying to hide myself for another few years. But ever since I made the transition to Illinois Masonic, it hasn't even been an issue about me being transgender. It's completely accepted there. My team that I work with on site, the team that I work with for research, never any issues. It's been wonderful. I've had nothing but support my entire time. So I'm thankful that now, having kind of progressed all these years, it's no longer coming out. It's just being who I want to be.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. Anyone else? Dallas?
Yes. So I identify as a cis male, gay male. And so I have been fortunate that since I entered the workforce, I have been my authentic self. I would say initially the first company that I was at was a bit more conservative. So it's not that I was hiding who I was. I just wasn't more so, I guess, advertising or being as open as I am now about my identity, myself, my life. So it wasn't until I would say in the past 3-4 years that I was able to really, feel super comfortable just being my authentic self, bringing my entire self to work, sharing about, my wedding to my husband, talking about just, planning for the future, and being comfortable just to, have that sort of openness and feeling that embrace from my coworkers and my teammates. So it's been good for me.
Thank you for sharing. Dr. Schafer?
Well, for me, I identify as a cisgender female. I have male partner, so I really identify as an ally, and that I haven't faced the challenges that that many of you have faced, and it warms my heart to hear the positive things. It breaks my heart to hear that you even have to think about it, and so I've always hoped to be a person who can help support and facilitate openness and just being for the people around me.
Thank you. We need you. We see you. We appreciate you. Thank you. Dr. Clay?
So I think some other people kind of alluded to this, how identity is sort of complex and evolving over our lives. And I think a lot of trans people in particular joke about how, the conversation with the public, with cis people, like your gender is sort of one thing, and conversation with other people who have commonalities a lot more nuanced. So it's actually kind of a complex question, but currently I identify as a transgender, non-binary person. I'm trans masculine, sometimes I identify as trans male, kind of a shorthand that makes it easier to to communicate. That has been a fairly recent evolution. I have always been identified as queer, and to a greater or lesser extent, openly queer, at work and in education. I'm just coming out of about 15 years of medical education, so it's kind of the perspective I come from. But I think it's interesting that we have internal identity and how we present as the world. So early on in my education, I was presenting in a more feminine way. I was married to a man. I had young children. And so while I had internal identity, there wasn't as much of an issue how I presented externally. So while I was open, I didn't really discuss or talk about it. And I was using kind of routine pronouns and name that would be expected with how I presented, more or less. And so, over the years, I've been more open and my identity and my presentation have been evolving, particularly over the last, 5 or 6 years. So I've been openly non-binary, open about who I was, but things, pretty dramatically changed as far as my relationship with the outside world in about the past 2 years, where, I initially kind of asked for the pronouns that I prefer professionally. And actually kind of started out professionally rather than in my internal personal life. And I received a wonderful amount of support, and it was really great, despite the fact that I was a trainee and in kind of a vulnerable position to do that. Kind of followed, I think, shortly thereafter by a little bit more personal transition and social transition, and changed my preferred name. And I actually haven't dotted all the I's and crossed the T's. So I kind of currently have a legal name and a preferred name, like many transgender people do. But I have had absolutely nothing but fantastic support professionally and educationally in my personal life. So I've been very, very lucky. And I think that has been very intentional, both from the individuals and the institutions that I have been involved in. And I'm very, very lucky for that. And a lot of that has to do with privilege, honestly, positions I've always in.
Thank you for your transparency and your honesty, Pat. Angela.
So I identify as a butch lesbian. I'm not uncomfortable with the word dyke because a lot of my friends and are very, in our usage and how we talk about ourselves, and that's not a word that makes me uncomfortable, but I know that sometimes when I use it, other people cringe. So I try to be really careful with that. Coming out, I would say I would call it glacial in my progress with coming out. It was really tough. I got into a long-term serious relationship with a man when I was really young, and got married and had kids and came out to him before we even had kids. And so like you're all describing too, or many of us are describing, there's an internal and a very intimate relationship with myself. And then there's even the next layer, and then the next layer and the next layer. And so it took a really long time for me. And it's been an evolution as well. And it wasn't always easy, even with close friends and coworkers, because I was still married and had kids. And so there was some pushback sometimes, and with family as well. Even 2 weeks before I was going to marry my wife, my dad said to me, "You're not really you sure you should marry her?" And so I said, yeah, I'm sure, Dad. So I will say, well, we'll talk about that later, I think, but my experience at Advocate Aurora has been stellar. I've never felt more comfortable in a job anywhere. And I really appreciate the hard work that I see happens here. And I'm proud to be a part of it now. So thank you.
Thank you all for sharing your journey. And again, for your transparency. I think you will all be inspiring to my adolescents. So thank you so much. This question, Maci and Dallas, if you feel comfortable, What is one thing you want your colleague to know or understand about the LGBTQ plus community?
I can start. So I thought a lot about this, and I think one thing I would like to have others, outside of the queer community, understand is that it is a part of me that I'm super proud of. And I think to people outside of the queer community, it's tends to be like, oh, that's the defining, like that's your defining, part of you. Like that's who you are. You're this queer individual. That's all you are. And that's not just all that I am, although it's a part that I'm very proud of. I'm also, Latinx. I'm proud of being that. I, have other things that I'm proud of. It's a part of my identity, but it's not my entire identity. It's not what I want to be, looked at as only as being part of the queer community. But yeah, that's the one thing I would like others to know is that we're not. I'm not just queer. I am also Latinx. I am also a first generation college graduate. I am a first generation homeowner. There's a lot of things that I'm proud of that make me me. And that would be one thing I'd love others to understand.
Yep, Maci, anything to add?
Yeah, I mean, to echo Dallas, yeah, I mean, being trans, being queer is not, all of who I am. We are much more complex people with likes, dislikes, hobbies, multiple layers, like an onion of who we are. Each of us complex and should be celebrated for it. Separately, I've been very kind of more politically motivated the last few years, so obviously that kind of shapes, stories and things I talk about. But one of the big things is coming from like these far right conservative movements that we've seen recently in the news and online, that, people in the LGBTQ plus community, we're not the boogeymen that we're made out to be. We're not, the scary people who are out there being, looking at children and trying to convert everybody to our lifestyle. We are normal people, quote unquote normal. We are just people who are just trying to exist and love who we want to love and live our lives to the fullest. We're your family members and your co-workers, your neighbors. We are the people that you just see every day on the street, and there's nothing scary about us that needs to be demonized just because of who we are. All we are trying to do is just exist in this world, and it's hard enough as it is, without the extra stigma. So that's just what I want to tell everybody.
100% Maci. We're just humans. We have the same emotions, same feelings. Like we're just people.
Yes, there's nothing wrong with displaying loving yourself and loving someone else. I tell my patients that all the time. Self-love and loving and love who you want. I don't care. Well, I care in some context, but you guys be careful. All right. Dr. Clay or Angela, did you ever feel like you needed to hide your identity at work? If so, what has changed? I know, Dr. Clay, you said some things at the beginning.
I guess I did hesitate early in my training. I essentially did not bring it up. I started med school in about 2008. At that point, it was fairly routine advice for people to be discreet about their gender and sexuality, particularly when applying for residency. And my colleagues who were out and gay were told even to keep that quiet on clinical rotations in case it would hamper their evaluations by faculty. So while, people said everything was tolerant, you were still receiving this advice from academic advisors, et cetera. So I was cautious, and then the behavior that I saw during that time period reinforced that caution. And I would say that that changed very much And I really now, looking back intentionally in response to this question, I think the watershed time period was in fact the legalization of gay marriage, which was not very long ago, about 8 years ago. So that was during my PhD, and I was in Iowa, which is one of the states that had early legalized gay marriage. And the shift in curriculum and the shift in attitudes really happened over that time period, and people became, explicitly supportive. I don't know if individuals' attitudes changed, but what was acceptable and what was accepted changed. And again, it wasn't super relevant to me, but as I became more open, that changed environment and education really did apply. And I think that I've seen that in the professional environment also, although, I can't speak as much to that over the same time period. I will say that that evolution came later for transgender people, and I never even heard this addressed during my time in medical school and training, and not really until residency. And I think within the last 5 or 10 years, people have still replied to anonymous surveys that they would be hesitant to include transgender trainees in their residency programs, for example. So, that is still, an evolving acceptance, but I see over the last 5 years, that has become much, much better, despite the recent public hatred. I think it's become much better. But yeah, I have definitely seen that change over the last 15 years, and my comfort in being professional out has changed.
Again, true representation for my patients. I'm glad that they get to see someone like you and some of their favorite celebrities be their authentic selves. So thank you again. Angela, anything?
So I couldn't agree more about gay marriage being a turning point, and more people being able to, and myself as well, in many ways. It changed quite a bit in people's comfort. I think things were complex for me in many ways because I was still married to my husband. And so it was always at work, right? It's an issue of how much is people's business, right? And do I want to answer everybody's questions about my life? But once I became divorced, I do know for sure that at work, there was a lot of speculation about me. Sometimes I would do trainings and people would leave and I'd be cleaning up the papers afterwards, and I'd find notes they were writing to each other, asking if they think I'm a dyke or not. And so that was not comfortable for me, to feel that I know there's a lot of people talking. There's a lot of people asking questions, and not to me, right? And not talking to me. And that being said, I am so transparent. I mean, I can't even bluff, right? It's really hard for me not to be really authentic. That's just part of who I am. And so it helped when I did get divorced and got married to a woman as well, and was dating a woman. That helped me quite a bit, be able to speak more openly about it, because I could just answer questions and I didn't have to get into the whole, but what does your husband think about that? You know what I mean? Which I feel like is partly not even, it's his business. You know what I mean? That's not even my business. And so it's been complicated for me, and that's part of why it took so long. And there was a lot of other things going on, but yeah, it's been tough sometimes. But I know also I've worked collaboratively with lots of other agencies around the world, and many of them are religiously based. And so there was a huge, like it felt like a blanket over everything. And then when gay marriage was legalized, all of that opened up, and so many people who I had no idea what they thought became huge allies. And I didn't know, you know what I mean? So that was really helpful.
Dr. Schafer. Question for you is, how can we reduce health inequities for the LGBTQ plus community? It's a big question, broad question, right?
Yeah, that's a real softball.
Yes, I'll help a little bit. Anybody else can help, but yeah.
I mean, there's a couple of lenses through which I sort of see an answer to that. One is through the sphere of education. You know, I am so impressed with the caliber of our students, medical students, PA students, nursing students, and one, the knowledge that they have coming in that many of us did not have, but then how they are pushing our institution to include things in the curriculum, to broaden programs that are increasing education and awareness around LGBTQ health and the associated disparities. So that's really the first step, is we have to be aware. And so we now, in part because of our student initiatives, we have trainings across the enterprise to help educate people in all different positions across the enterprise. And so I think that is a big step. But then I think another important piece of that is for those of us who are in relative positions of power, and I use that term, it's not the best term, but I mean, we know that to some extent physicians in our society are seen as, you know, having a certain amount of, I'm an infectious disease physician, y'all. Like, I even feel silly saying this, like prestige. I don't know, maybe because of COVID now there is a little prestige associated with being an ID doc, but I think we have to use our power for good. Social capital. Yes, thank you, Alex. We have to use that social capital and that power for good, and be vocal advocates for our friends, family, colleagues, neighbors, and patients. And so I think that education, being outspoken, getting our institutions to sponsor things like Pride, getting our institutions to start advertising for PrEP and other healthcare initiatives to help support some of our more vulnerable populations, creating LGBTQ focused health clinics where they're safe spaces for our patients who identify as members of the community to come. I think those are some of the ways that locally perhaps we can affect change more globally.
Yeah, I think you know, that, like you said, it's a loaded question. We definitely have to start at the top, right? Structurally, right? Systemic racism, discrimination, etc. Nothing is going to change until policy changes, right? Until we can change where these people live and provide them with resources, etc. You know, as a Black woman, you know, I've encountered some of the social determinants of health that my patients have. And so I think it's, you know, we have to make sure that we have stakeholders, not just from healthcare, not, you know, education, criminal justice, etc. Right? I can personally have a seat at the table, but still not be able to implement change, right? And so I'm going to be completely transparent, right? Until we have cisgender white men, right, being more outraged or same outraged as us, a lot of things may not change as quickly as we want. And so we need to, again, we need to have more allies. You know, we need to, like Maci said, we need to get in the polls and vote. You know, a lot of these laws are anti-trans, right? How can doctors, Schafer, Dr. Clay, and I all took an oath to do no harm, right? But at the end of the day, if I can't provide gender affirming care, which is life-saving care, what am I supposed to do, right? And so I'm fortunate to work in the city of Chicago, right, where where some of my colleagues and I can provide gender affirming care. But I have adolescent medicine specialists friends who are working in Florida, in Texas, right, in Montana. And so that whose jobs are on the line. And so again, structurally we have so much more to do. We have came a long way, you know, but there's still so much work to do.
Yeah. Just to add, I totally agree. I think we need to remember that it's enough to be personally tolerant or to say that you treat all people the same, you know, you recognize everybody as human. There has to be specific policies and culture that make an environment welcoming. And for our patients, we need to recognize the existing inequalities and the obstacles that people place are like under, and particularly, I think for people with intersecting identities. You know, and you know, not my place to speak, but you know, Black, trans people are, you know, at a huge risk of violence. You know, people's adverse experiences in the healthcare system over multiple identities really matter, and we have to recognize and address that specifically. But you know, for transgender people specifically, the majority of transgender people report discrimination in healthcare that has adversely affected or prevented them from getting care. And there is a fear of even trying to get care in any context that we have to address. So, you know, using names is, you know, great, using pronouns is great, you know, having our epic systems updated is great, you know, being tolerant is great, but we have to address that injustice that is there. And it is a, not just a perceived risk, but a real risk. You know, in 26 states, it's legal to exclude a broad range of LGBT healthcare. In Florida, currently, it is explicitly legal to deny any medical care, including emergency care. And there's probably one holdup, you know, to challenge, but based on their gender identity, if the provider has a moral exception, just to the person existing, not to the kind of care that's presented. And so, you know, people are truly afraid that if their identity is found out, they will be denied care, and historically this has happened. And so, you know, similar, you know, to our responsibilities when it comes to race and other minorities identity, like minoritized identity, we really need to recognize that harm and actively fix it, you know. And, you know, it is absolutely true, you know, that my experience as a patient and person, as, you know, a white physician is entirely different than the experience, you know, of most transgender people.
Anyone else have anything to add in regards to the health inequities? How can we create a more inclusive work environment for our LGBT? Oh, how can we create a more inclusive work environment for our LGBTQ plus workforce? Maci, Dallas, anyone?
I mean, I think it's kind of been mentioned a few times is education. You know, it just getting it out there. A lot of people don't know. I attended the panel discussion last week and kind of just went over the brief topics of just, you know, LGBTQ terms and how people identify and things like that. And a lot of comments came through of people just being like, I've never heard of these terms before. I don't know what cisgender means. I don't, you know, I've heard of transgender in just the broadest, you know, umbrella, you know, all these different terms like intersex and asexual and all these things that fall across the LGBTQ plus spectrum. And people just have no exposure to it. So, you know, they only come up with the biases that are fed to them from media or social media or, you know, just what they've grown up with. So getting the education out there, I think, is the best way to you know, combat these kind of prejudices and make a more inclusive environment. You know, at Illinois Masonic, the LGBTQ plus committee is pushing our health HEI education out. So I think it's a health equality index education that's coming from the National LGBTQ plus Centers for Education. We're pushing that out not only just to, you know, physicians and nurses and clinical staff, but we're also trying to involve, you know, PSRs. We're trying, you know, our patient service reps. We're trying to involve, you know, environmental services and food services. Anyone that comes in contact with patients, you know, and or other team members. We're just trying to get out there and be like, hey, there's education that you can do. You know, it helps you become more aware of the world around you and the people that you work with and the people you interact. So you just are a little bit more, have a more intrinsic knowledge of like what's going on. So you don't have your implicit biases coming through to, you know, dictate how you interact with them. And that's kind of how I always approach that, you know, whether it's someone on a personal level or something like, you know, a hospital-wide committee trying to push forward the education.
Awesome. Thank you. Yes, education is key, like you said, for anybody who is in contact with a patient. I think I read recently that maybe as far as medical education goes, there is only maybe 5 medical schools in the country that actually have an LGBTQ plus curriculum, and there's like 173 medical schools. So again, we have a lot of work to do. I know, again, through the advocate system, there's certain virtual things that we can do, etc. There is simulation at Illinois Masonic, but I think that should be at every campus, right? I think for me, it's important for me to have my pronoun badge. I have my whole office decorated for Pride Month. I have signs on the wall so that my patients can come in and see that they belong here and that I will treat them, even if their parents, you know, are not on board yet. And so, you know, it's education, but then also a display, at least in my aspect, in my area of expertise that my patients really, really appreciate. So, Dr. Schafer.
Just to follow up on the point about medical school curricula, I know we are, as I guess the academic core now of the Advocate Aurora. I'm still learning of the Advocate Aurora world. Just to let you know a little bit about what we do here. So to give you hope, you know, one of the wonderful things about being with the medical school is that every year is a new group of new ideas, new energies, new lived experiences, and our students come from just a tremendously diverse set of backgrounds, and so then they bring those with them. And so because of our students' interest and initiative, they now have at their first day orientation as part of their launch programming, they have an introduction to safe zone training. There's a safe zone student group that has created, they've adapted the standard safe zone training for healthcare settings, so safe zone in medicine, which they've actually presented at national meetings. And they have a 3-night training that's open to the entire enterprise every year, but now they've also adapted it, and it has been disseminated through our Office of Diversity and Inclusion across the enterprise to all different departments and roles, and that's a standing offer now. I think they do them, if not weekly, monthly, they offer them, and then also departments and groups can request additional training. And then throughout our curricula, we have threaded in just to normalize, like in some of our simulated cases, female patients who have wives, using terminology like partner. And when we teach how to take a sexual history, we also teach the importance of gender identity versus gender expression. Honestly, though, the students know so much more oftentimes than us older folks. It's inspiring, but just to normalize some of these issues, we've been threading them through the curricula, and then we have little rainbow caduceus pins that I don't know if you can see that for folks who complete the Safe Zone in Medicine training, they can get those so that folks also are able to recognize that hey, this person is a safe person. So there's lots of really positive things happening in the medical education sphere, and they're continuing to grow and grow. We certainly have a lot more to do. We've come a long way. We have a long way to go, but good things are happening thanks to our students and the School of Medicine.
Awesome. We got to get some future docs down there. That's amazing. Angela, I see your hand.
So just looking at it from more of a, this is an enterprise that has tens of thousands of employees, hundreds of thousands of employees, right? And one of the things that I really appreciate and value is the culture of, and what I'm noticing is that, and I believe that it's legitimate, is that there's a culture of it's okay to make mistakes, right? And as we talk to people coworkers who have been working here for a long time, maybe they've only ever worked here, or they don't have a lot of experience with LGBTQI folks, that it's okay to ask questions. And I think one of the things that reinforces it is events like this, right? Like this is really important to get it out that we're doing these things. Not everybody can come, but it's happening. Also, the SharePoint DEI website, I think that's really helpful. It's got tons of resources. And sometimes we can just send links and say, oh, you have a question about definitions and identities. Here's a great glossary. Here's a great resource guide. Or here's some videos that you can watch. So I really find that helpful too. And just with, people on a very personal level, the hundreds and hundreds of people who work at a hospital, everybody's going to be at a different place, right? And I feel like at this enterprise, that's okay. That's okay. It's okay to ask questions. And if somebody makes a mistake, there's some tolerance for that without feeling like, it's really bad. And so I feel like all those resources kind of support that, right? That we're all learning, and that's part of our job, is to learn and grow.
But in that note, if we can teach diversity all day, but if we don't hire people who look like the communities we're in every aspect, and people aren't actually, you can teach whatever you want, but if you don't hire at every level, people with diversity, people, then it doesn't mean anything. Same thing with, trainees, and, medical students and residents and who we recruit and how we look to the community and do we look like the community. And I think, it has to be more than lip service.
Absolutely.
Because it just can't be a bunch of, people talking to themselves and performing allyship and not actually listening to people who've lived the experience.
Absolutely right. Evidence-based medicine tells us that, people tend to actually get better health care from those who actually understand where they come from, right? So you are absolutely right. We need to hire more from the LGBTQ plus community, more minorities, right, etc. We need more recruiting, retaining our specialists, and anyone of our healthcare providers. Our last question, because I know we're running out of time. It's a good question. How did you or how will you be celebrating Pride this year?
I'll go first, if that's okay this time. Everybody else has taken a turn, I think. So Kenosha has a Pride. It's kind of small. It hasn't been around forever, so I do like to support it. It's in July. I will say that, I'm not really, my wife and I don't love giant parties, with lots of crazy stuff happening. So when I go to bigger city prides, what I really love and I've had a huge emotional reaction to the history displays. That's really important to me. And I feel like I think it's helpful to everyone to understand our history and to feel like we have a sense of community and that we belong. And the history displays to me they really choke me up. So that's important to me. So it's not how I'm celebrating Pride, but that's one of the things I find really important about it.
Yeah, I I celebrate Pride. So I have two little nieces, and they are the most incredible thing. And I am fortunate that my partner's family, they're teachers, and so we teach our nieces, queer history, and they love having, their rainbow, shirts on. We celebrate by watching, my husband and I watch queer movies. Of course, Pride Fest is another big thing to celebrate. I just love to really inform myself and learn more of the history. Last year I went to Stonewall Inn, so it was such a cool moment to be able to be there, and be inside and be a part and stand where history was made. So I just love to inform myself and learn and ask questions and educate others during Pride Month.
Yeah, so I just went to the Chicago Pride Parade this last Sunday. It's the first time me and my wife rode our motorcycles in the parade. So first time ever doing that, which was a lot of fun. So my hearing and my voice have not come back from that yet. But it was great to see everyone, just go up and down the street, and you can just see the streets lined with people, down both sides for miles, because I didn't realize the parade was much longer this year than it normally is. So it was great seeing that, for a big, like, kind of almost end of month celebration. But otherwise, outside of that, me and my wife, we have a daughter, so it's just kind of, teaching her that, people that are queer, gay, lesbian, she sees a very, like, heteronormative type of lifestyle, at school with her friends, everything like that. So just teaching her that people, who have two moms, or who have two dads, or who just have parents that love them, that's the big key, is that they have parents that love them, and that's really what we've been pushing with her, because, she's seen on TV, or sometimes she'll be like, oh, they have two dads, that's weird. And I'm like, well, that's not weird. That's just, they have parents that love them. That's the most important part, So lately I've been pushing that a little bit more with her, just because to get her to understand the broader world, especially since she doesn't get as much exposure. We kind of live on the south side of Chicago. So again, a little bit more conservative, more traditional type of family roles in that unit. So it's nice to kind of push that with her a little bit more.
Pride for me and my family was a little bit bittersweet this year. There's two sides to it. One is the side of celebration and joy and supporting each other as a community, and recognizing how diverse we are, and that would be, we're not a monolith, and just taking joy and being ourselves and supporting each other. And the element of protest and anger, that this is not a fight that happened in the past that is over. This is a continued fight and struggle for rights and acceptance of society and employment and healthcare that is all very relevant here today. And a realization that if we are not fighting for each other, then nobody's going to fight for us, And so, I think there was a lot of anger for me this year in Pride. Being in a state where, the rights of my queer child and myself are, under attack, and my friends, and there have been threats of violence, and people not feeling free to celebrate with their families. And so, I think having joy existing publicly as an act of defiance and resistance, it's something that we're doing together. But, both of those things are true, pride and joy and defiance.
Understood. We're going to keep fighting a good fight with you. We got your back all the way. Okay. I think there was a comment in the chat of, I guess, when I said something about structural racism and things starting at the top. I think maybe it was taken out of context. I just feel like people that are historically marginalized, that come from historically marginalized communities, should not always have to be the ones taking on the emotional labor of educating others, right? And so in the same way, right, white people should be educating other white people about systemic racism, right? Or non-LGBTQ plus members of the community should be, providing allyship and education for the LGBTQ plus community. So that's kind of where that comment came from. And so I'm a proud auntie of a trans niece. I'm a proud Black woman, so I speak from experience. And so there's so many avenues that we still have to cross, and our work is not undone, like Dr. Clay said. So thank you all.
Yes, thank you so much. And I know our time really went fast today, and this is just the beginning, you all. So I want to share that we will have more. I saw that theme in the comments around it shouldn't just be June. We agree. We had to start somewhere. And I'm proud to say that this was an enterprise event, and so we were able to have representation from our entire enterprise. But this is just the beginning. I want to thank our panel and our moderator. I say this often, it is a gift what you've given us today, your vulnerability, sharing your story. Angela, you said how much of my business or what of my business, none of it is owed to us. So thank you for giving it to us, right? You don't have to share any of who you are with us. So I appreciate that gift. Much more to come. I'm going to share my screen just because I want to make sure we're on the same page. We do not have a scheduled Who We Are session yet, but you can rejoin us in the fall. I know we will be doing one for National Coming Out Day, which is October 11th, so stay tuned for that. But you can continue the conversation with us in between. Please complete the survey. It's so important for us to continue to create a space for all of us, so we will hear your feedback. I saw questions in the chat. Thank you, Julie. Julie King, my partner in good, who also helped to create today's event, was sharing some educational resources. Education is so important, but as we shared here today too, it's just one component. We have to continue to connect with each other and hear these stories and build empathy because the work is not done. So I couldn't agree more. But please, we look forward to staying connected in other ways. Thank you again to our wonderful panelists and moderator. You'll get today's recording as soon as we have it. As soon as we get it from our partners in brand, we'll get it over to you. But thank you so, so much for being here, and more to come. Take care, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.